Snow fell so thick it swallowed sound itself. Each flake landed in silence, building a white tomb around the valley floor. The world had contracted to 50 meters of visibility in any direction, maybe less. Above, clouds pressed low and gray, a ceiling that seemed to descend with each passing hour, turning the Colorado Rockies into a landscape of muted whites and darker grays, a place where winter ruled even in late February. Corporal Sloan Cade crouched behind a frost-covered boulder, her medic's bag already heavy with cold. Her breath came in short clouds that vanished into the gray morning. Around her, the veterans moved with practiced efficiency, their weapons ready, their eyes scanning terrain they could barely see. She was still learning to read them. 22 years old, 3 months out of advanced training, the newest face in 2nd Platoon, the youngest by 4 years, the only one who still jumped at sudden noises during live fire exercises. She was 5'4", 118 pounds, small enough that the standard issue pack rode high on her shoulders, small enough that some of the gear felt outsized in her hands. But her hands were steady. They'd always been steady, even when everything else wasn't. The unit moved through a valley carved by glacial time, a place where pine trees stood like frozen sentinels, their branches bent under snow's weight, their needles dark against impossible white. Wind cut through tactical gear like it wasn't there, finding every gap, every opening, turning warm skin cold. Sloane's fingers were already losing feeling inside her gloves. She flexed them around her aid kit, keeping circulation moving, a habit from training that had become instinct. Ahead, Lieutenant Owen Garrett moved at point 20 meters from the main formation. 32 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of officer who'd come up through enlisted ranks and never forgot it. He checked corners that didn't exist yet, his weapon always at low ready finger, resting along the trigger guard. Behind him, Corporal Wyatt Larkin covered right angles with mechanical precision. 29, lean and hard, with eyes that missed nothing and a mouth that said too much. His movements were economical, nothing wasted. Private First Class Tessa Hollis brought up rear guard. 26, compact and powerful, her movements smooth despite the knee-deep snow. Her eyes constantly moved, constantly assessed. She was the closest thing Sloan had to an ally in the platoon, though ally might be too strong a word, more like someone who wasn't actively dismissive. They were a machine, these veterans. Gears that meshed perfectly after months of training together, years of experience apart. And Sloan was the spare part. They'd been forced to carry the component that didn't quite fit, that threw off the rhythm everyone else had found. Staff Sergeant Victor Brennan appeared beside her, his boots crunching through snow that came up past his ankles. 35 years old, graying at the temples, with the kind of weathered face that came from too many deployments in too many bad places. His tone carried no malice when he spoke, just fact. "Stay back, Cade. 15 meters, always 15 meters back." He barely looked at her as he passed. She was a medic. Her place was behind the line, patching holes after the real soldiers made them. That was the natural order of things in 2nd Platoon, and nobody questioned it. Sloan cinched her bag tighter and followed at the required distance. 15 meters back, always 15 meters back. The mission was simple on paper. Recon sweep through contested territory. Verify enemy withdrawal from Glacier Valley. Report back. Standard procedure for a sector supposedly cleared 3 days ago, marked green on maps back at base, declared safe by analysts who'd never walked this ground. But Sloan had learned in her short time with the platoon that simple missions had a way of becoming complicated, and safe was a word that meant different things to different people. She watched the way Garrett moved, how he unconsciously adjusted his grip every 43 steps, compensating for an old wrist injury that probably ached in the cold. How Brennan favored his right knee after long marches, subtle weight redistribution that spoke of damage not quite healed. How Larkin's breath pattern changed 30 seconds before he called a halt, his body reading fatigue before his mind acknowledged it. Sloan counted steps, measured distances, noted wind direction by how snow fell against tree trunks. Old habits from a life nobody here knew about, skills nobody had asked her to demonstrate. Nobody had asked where she'd learned to observe with such precision. The medic evaluation board had cared about tourniquet speed and triage protocols, checking boxes on forms, not the other skills she'd brought with her, the ones she'd buried deep and hoped would stay buried. They'd been walking for 40 minutes when Colonel Marcus Aldridge appeared beside her, his boots making no sound in the snow despite his size. Sloan startled, barely keeping herself from jumping. The old man moved like a ghost, like someone who'd learned long ago that noise could kill. "Easy, Corporal." Aldridge's voice was low, meant only for her. He was 67 years old and should have been behind a desk or on a golf course enjoying retirement earned through decades of service. Instead, he was here walking through a blizzard in the Colorado Rockies, claiming he needed to evaluate modern training methods against tactics from his era. But colonels didn't go on routine recon patrols to evaluate training. They sent subordinates with clipboards. They watched from observation posts with coffee and heaters. Didn't hear you approach, sir. That was the point. Aldridge matched her pace as M4 held with casual competence, his eyes on the terrain ahead. First real deployment, Corporal Cade. First deployment as a medic, sir. Aldridge glanced at her, and Sloan saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. Interesting distinction, he said. Sloan said nothing. She'd learned that silence was often safer than words, especially around officers who asked questions with layers underneath. You move well for someone with only basic training, Aldridge continued. Most rookies are stumbling, by now exhausted fighting the terrain. You're watching it, reading it, using it. Thank you, sir. That tree line to our left. What do you see? The question came without warning, a test disguised as conversation. Sloane's eyes went to the indicated area automatically, years of training kicking in before she could stop them. She saw the natural funnel created by two rock outcroppings, the way the trees created a corridor that would channel movement, the elevated position that would give anyone positioned there advantage over the valley floor. A 40-degree kill zone with overlapping fields of fire. Good cover for defensive positions, she said carefully. Clear sight lines down into the valley. If someone wanted to observe or control this approach, that's where they'd set up. Aldridge nodded slowly. Most medics would have said trees and rocks. You're seeing terrain as tactical advantage. Where'd you learn that? Combat Lifesaver course covers basic battlefield awareness, sir. Does it now? Aldridge's tone suggested he knew she was lying, or at least not telling the complete truth. They walked in silence for another minute. Sloan could feel his presence beside her, solid and calm. A man who'd seen things she could only imagine, and probably a few things she'd seen herself. Your father, Aldridge said suddenly. James Cade, Delta Force 80s and 90s. Good man, very good at his job. Sloan's chest tightened. Yes, sir, he passed away 2 years ago. I know, I'm sorry. We crossed paths a few times over the years. Operation Just Cause Desert Storm. He ever teach you anything beyond the standard curriculum? Just the importance of attention to detail, sir, and finishing what you start. Wise advice. Aldridge paused. You should remember that out here. Details matter. Starting something you can't finish can get people killed. Before Sloan could respond, Brennan's voice cut through the falling snow from ahead. Water break, 5 minutes. The unit took knee positions in a defensive half circle, each person covering a sector, weapons ready. Sloan moved to the center as expected. The safe position, the protected position, the useless position for anyone who actually knew how to fight. She pulled a water bottle from her pack. The liquid was already cold enough to hurt teeth. Around her, veterans drank with practiced efficiency, never taking eyes off their sectors for more than 2 seconds. Muscle memory battle drill, the kind of thing that came from doing it 1,000 times until it was automatic. Sloan drank and looked, her eyes moving, despite herself, finding the irregularities everyone else was missing or ignoring. The valley continued northeast, narrowing gradually. Trees thickened on both slopes, natural funnel-perfect terrain for channeling an advancing force into a kill zone. The kind of setup that appeared in every tactical manual ever written, every ambush scenario ever taught. Garrett was studying his map, correlating coordinates with terrain features barely visible through the snowfall. His expression showed concentration, but no concern. This area had been marked secure 3 days ago. Someone had walked this ground, called it clear, and everyone believed them because doubt meant extra work, and extra work is something nobody wanted. But Sloan's eyes kept tracking the tree line. Near that fallen log, 40 meters upslope, the snow sat different, lighter, more recent. Something had disturbed the older accumulation within the last hour, maybe less. Could be an animal, could be wind, could be nothing, could be something. Movement discipline is sloppy. Brennan was speaking quietly to Hollis, just loud enough for Sloan to overhear. Larkin, tighten your interval. You're bunching up. Copy that? Larkin adjusted his position, moving 3 feet to the right. Sloan said nothing. She had no authority to question tactical decisions, no credibility to raise concerns that might be nothing. She was the rookie who jumped at shadows, the medic who didn't understand that combat veterans knew what they were doing. Her eyes found another irregularity. 50 meters upslope, opposite side, a pine branch hung lower than its neighbors, bent under weight that seemed too much for simple snow accumulation. Recent weight, heavy weight, the kind of weight that came from something bigger than falling snow settling on wood. Her pulse climbed from 70 to 82. She flexed her fingers, feeling for the reassuring weight of her sidearm on her belt. Beretta M915 rounds, 1 in chamber. Standard issue qualification weapon, something she'd shot during training and never expected to use. Mount up. Garrett folded his map, tucked it into his jacket. They moved deeper into the valley. Every instinct from Sloane's previous life said this was wrong. All wrong. Fundamentally wrong in ways she couldn't articulate without revealing things she'd promised never to reveal. The silence was too complete. No bird calls, no small animal movement. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. The wildlife knew something the humans didn't. They'd gone to ground, found holes and hollows, places where predators couldn't reach. Aldridge fell into step beside her again. "You look troubled, Corporal." "Just cold, sir." "No, you look troubled. I've seen that expression before, usually right before things go bad. What are you seeing that I'm missing?" Sloane hesitated. The old man's eyes were sharp, knowing the kind of eyes that had seen through lies so many times that lying to them seemed pointless. "Nothing concrete, sir. Just the wildlife is too quiet. Snow distribution looks disturbed in a few places. Could be nothing. Could be something." Aldridge's hand moved to his rifle's subtle adjustment readiness without alarm. "Those are good observations. When we get back, remind me to have a conversation about why someone with your skills is carrying a medic bag instead of a rifle." "I chose the medic path, sir. People choose things for lots of reasons." Aldridge's voice dropped lower. "Sometimes the things we run from are the things we need most. Remember that." They'd been walking for 90 minutes total when Larkin stopped abruptly, hand to his head. He'd been complaining for the last 20 minutes, subtle things. Headache. Thirst despite drinking constantly. Irritability that seemed out of proportion to normal mission stress. "You good, Corporal?" Brennan called back. "Yeah, just heads pounding, probably the altitude." But Sloane was already moving forward, her medical training, overriding her position in the formation. She'd been watching Larkin for the last 30 minutes, seeing the signs, adding them up. Excessive thirst, headache, flushed skin visible even in the cold, irritability. The timeline fit. The symptoms fit. "Corporal Larkin," her voice was firm, professional, "let me check your pupils." "Now." Larkin turned, annoyance flashing across his face. "I'm fine, Cade. It's just, that wasn't a request." Something in her tone made him stop. Made Brennan stop. Made Garrett turn around. Sloane pulled out her penlight, moved close to Larkin. His pupils were slightly dilated, sluggish response to light. His skin, when she touched his forehead, was warmer than it should be in this temperature. "When did you last urinate?" "What?" "Answer the question, Corporal. When was your last urination?" "I don't know, maybe 3 hours ago." "And you've been drinking constantly?" "Yeah, can't seem to get enough." "Early heat exhaustion," Sloane said loud enough for Garrett to hear. "Hyperthermia stage 1. He's been sweating under all those layers, losing electrolytes faster than plain water can replace them. Give him another 30 minutes of exertion, he'll collapse. Maybe go into shock." The silence that followed was different from the silence of the forest. This was human silence, the pause that came when people reassessed their assumptions. Garrett moved closer. "You sure about this diagnosis, Corporal?" "Yes, sir, positive. We need to get electrolytes in him, reduce his core temperature gradually, and cut his pack weight by at least 20% for the next hour." Brennan was already pulling electrolyte packets from his kit. Hollis moved to redistribute Larkin's heavier equipment. Garrett watched Sloane with new eyes, calculation happening behind them. "Good catch, Cade," he said finally. Simple words, but they carried weight. Acknowledgement. The first crack in the wall. Larkin drank the electrolyte mixture, made a face at the taste. "Seriously?" "Seriously." Sloane's tone was matter of fact. "You were about 30 minutes from a medical evacuation and a very bad day. Drink it all." "Yes, ma'am." The "sir" was automatic, then he caught himself. She wasn't an officer, but respect didn't always follow rank. They resumed movement, slower now, with Sloane watching Larkin's condition. The color returned to his face gradually. His breathing normalized. Crisis averted by observation and knowledge, by seeing what others had missed. But the victory felt hollow because Sloane's eyes kept moving to the tree line, to the irregularities in snow distribution, to the branches that hung wrong, to all the small details that said danger in a language only she seemed to speak. 20 meters ahead, Garrett stopped at a junction where a smaller ravine intersected their path. He signaled for Larkin to check the side approach. Standard procedure, clearing the blind spot, making sure nothing was hiding in the dark space where snow hadn't quite reached. Larkin moved forward, weapon sweeping in controlled arcs, his breath coming in visible puffs. Sloane's bag bumped against her hip. Inside, medical supplies. Outside, on her belt, a sidearm she'd qualified expert with, but never been expected to use. Her thumb found the retention strap without conscious thought. Muscle memory, from 1,000 repetitions in a different context, a different lifetime. She caught herself and moved her hand back to the bag strap. Medics didn't check their weapons compulsively. Medics trusted the shooters to do their job while medics prepared to do theirs. That was the division of labor, the social contract, the way things worked. Clear, Larkin's voice came from the ravine mouth, echoing slightly against stone walls. They continued. The valley walls steepened, rising on both sides like the earth was closing around them, swallowing them into something deep and cold and patient. 300 meters ahead, the valley narrowed to a bottleneck, a place where the walls came so close together that the unit would have to compress, lose their spacing, become vulnerable. Past that terrain, opened into what looked like a natural bowl surrounded by high ground on three sides. Perfect position for an ambush. Textbook. The kind of thing taught on day one of tactics training. Fix the enemy in a confined space, hit them from elevated positions with overlapping fields of fire, cut off their retreat, destroy them in detail. Sloane's heart rate climbed from 78 to 93. She controlled her breathing, 1, 2, 3, 4 and hold, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out the way she'd been taught long ago by instructors whose names she tried not to remember. Aldridge noticed, glanced at her. Breathe, Corporal. Whatever happens, breathe through it. Garrett led them toward the bottleneck. The unit tightened up, unconsciously bunching together as the valley walls forced proximity. Standard movement. Nothing wrong with it. Exactly what any unit would do in this terrain. Exactly what any ambushing force would expect them to do. Sloane opened her mouth. The words were right there, formed and ready. Sir, this is wrong. We need to find another route. This is a kill zone. We need to stop. The words sat on her tongue, heavy as stones. But she swallowed them. Because she was the rookie medic who'd been with the platoon for 3 months. Because she just diagnosed heat exhaustion and maybe used up her credibility for the day. Because these were veterans who'd done this 100 times and she was nobody to question their decisions. Because speaking up meant explaining how she knew, and explaining how she knew meant revealing what she'd buried. So she stayed silent and followed 15 meters back and watched the trap close around them and felt guilt build in her chest like pressure behind a dam. 50 meters from the bottleneck, 40, 30. The snow fell harder. The world shrank further. Somewhere a branch cracked under weight that shouldn't have been there. Sloane's pulse hit 100, and she flexed her fingers inside her gloves and thought about promises she'd made and promises she was about to break, and the difference between keeping your word and keeping people alive. 20 meters. Garrett raised his fist. Hold. The universal signal. The unit froze mid-step. For 5 seconds, nothing moved except falling snow. Sloane's heart hammered against her ribs. Her breath came shallow despite her training. Her eyes scanned the tree line with desperate intensity, looking for the threat she knew was there but couldn't quite see. Then Garrett's hand dropped. Forward. They moved again. 15 meters from the bottleneck. 10, 5. The first shot hit the snow 2 feet to Garrett's left, appearing without sound, just impact, just disruption of white surface. Then the crack of rifle fire echoed through the valley, rolling off stone walls, multiplying, becoming omnipresent. Contact front. The words were barely out of Garrett's mouth before the world exploded into chaos. The unit scattered to defensive positions with veteran speed muscle memory, overriding thought bodies moving, before minds fully processed what was happening. Weapons came up. Return fire snapped through the air, sharp cracks that competed with incoming rounds, creating a symphony of violence that shattered the snow silence. Sloane threw herself behind a boulder cluster as rounds chewed bark from trees above her head, sending splinters and snow cascading down. Her medical bag hit snow-hard supplies inside, shifting, reorganizing themselves according to physics and impact. She pressed flat, pulse hammering at 107. And in that moment, lying in the snow, with bullets carving the air above her, Sloane, Cade felt the weight of every word she hadn't spoken, every warning she'd swallowed, every instinct she'd ignored because she was just a medic. And medics didn't question tactics, and veterans knew better, and she was nobody to speak. The guilt was almost worse than the fear. Almost. Multiple shooters. Hollis's voice cut through the gunfire, high and tight but controlled. High ground left and right. The ambush was precise, professional, exactly what Sloane had feared. Enemy fire came from elevated positions on both valley walls, creating intersecting fields that covered every approach to the bottleneck, every piece of cover, every route that might offer escape. The unit was caught in the open, pinned down in terrain, offering minimal protection, taking fire from positions they couldn't effectively return fire against. Sloane's medical training screamed at her to scan for wounded. Her eyes moved across the defensive perimeter. Garrett moving, Hollis moving, Larkin returning fire up slope, with 3 round bursts at muzzle flashes barely visible through the snowfall, trying to suppress shooters he couldn't clearly see. No casualties yet. But the enemy fire was intensifying, finding range, adjusting, getting closer. Someone up there knew what they were doing. This wasn't harassment. This was systematic destruction executed with patience and skill. Garrett was yelling grid coordinates into his radio, calling for support, for extraction, for anything that might shift the balance. Static answered. White noise. The emptiness of blocked frequencies. Someone was jamming communications using equipment sophisticated enough to block military bands, which meant this wasn't some random encounter with poorly equipped irregulars. Radio's down. Garrett's voice carried an edge now, the first crack in his professional calm. More rounds impacted around them. Larkin fired back, expending ammunition they couldn't afford to lose, trying to do something, anything, to change an equation that mathematics said was unsolvable. We need to move. Back to the blue markers. Hollis shouted over the gunfire. But movement meant exposure. Movement meant crossing open ground under fire from positions that dominated the terrain. Movement meant choosing between different ways to dawn and hoping you pick the one that lets you keep breathing. Then the sound changed, a single crack, different from the chatter of automatic weapons. Higher pitched. Precise. The sound of a rifle designed to kill at distance with one carefully placed bullet. The sound of someone who didn't need to spray and pray because they knew exactly where their round would impact before they pressed the trigger. Staff Sergeant Victor Brennan went down hard. His left leg collapsed under him like the bones had turned to water. His weapon tumbled into snow. The scream that tore from his throat was raw, primal, beyond language. The sound of a man whose body had just betrayed him in the worst possible way. Man down. Hollis's scream cut it through everything raw and terrified. Sloan was moving before conscious thought formed, before decision became action. Pure instinct. Pure training. She sprinted through the snow medical bag, bouncing against her spine, head down as rounds snapped past. Close enough to feel the displacement of air. Close enough to know she should be dead. Close enough to understand that survival had stopped being about skill and become about statistics and luck. Training said, get to casualties fast, treat fast, move fast. She hit snow next to Brennan in a controlled slide, her body positioning itself between him and the most likely firing positions. Muscle memory she couldn't explain. Tactical awareness that shouldn't exist in someone whose file said basic medic. His leg was destroyed below the knee. Fabric and flesh and bone mixed together in configurations that violated every rule of human anatomy. Arterial blood pumped into white snow in rhythmic spurts, turning pristine white to crimson. Beautiful if it wasn't horror. Beautiful if it wasn't a man dying in real time, measured in heartbeats and blood loss. Tourniquet. Sloane's hands were already moving. No hesitation, no thought. She stripped the CAT device from her belt, positioned it high above the wound with precision born from hundreds of repetitions. Started cranking the windlass. The strap tightened. Brennan's scream became a roar that echoed off valley walls. More fire came down. Garrett and Larkin were suppressing hard, trying to create a window, trying to buy seconds. The tourniquet clicked into place. Blood flow stopped. Pressure built. Circulation cut. But life maintained. Sloan checked her watch, burned the time into memory. 1400 hours, 2 p.m. The clock was running now. Brennan had maybe 4 hours before tissue damage became permanent, before surgeons would have to choose between limb and life. Can you move? She shouted at Brennan. His face was gray with pain, shock already setting in like fog rolling across water. His body understanding what his mind hadn't accepted yet, but his eyes focused, locked on hers. She saw recognition there, saw him choosing to fight, saw him deciding that today wasn't the day. Yeah, then move. Now. She hauled him upright with strength that shouldn't exist in her frame, adrenaline overriding physics, making impossible things possible. He got weight on his good leg teeth, gritted against pain that must have been overwhelming. Together they staggered toward cover, while Hollis maintained fire, while rounds impacted where they'd been lying seconds earlier, while the universe contracted to movement and survival and the infinitesimal space between heartbeats. They made it. Barely. Rounds spanged off rock behind them as they collapsed into the shelter of a larger boulder formation. Sloan did rapid trauma assessment, hands moving across Brennan's body with clinical precision, checking for other wounds, other bleeding, other ways he might die while she was focused elsewhere. The tourniquet held. No other apparent wounds. Shock was coming like a freight train barreling down track, visible in his dilated pupils, his rapid, shallow breathing, his skin color fading from healthy tan to pale gray. But he was stable enough to move when they got the chance. if they got the chance. They're flanking. Larkin's voice held alarm, the first real fear Sloan had heard from him. Movement down slope, trying to cut off our withdrawal route. Sloan raised her head enough to look. The enemy wasn't content to pin them down and wait. They were maneuvering to surround moving elements to collapse the flanks while maintaining fire from elevated positions. Classic tactics straight from the manual. Fix them in place, then destroy them. And it was working with terrible efficiency. Garrett, we are about to be completely cut off. Hollis fired toward new movement downslope, her voice tight but controlled. The lieutenant's face showed the calculation every combat leader dreaded. Every choice led to death. The only question was which death and how many people it took with it. Try the radio again. Hollis pulled out her handset, worked the controls with one hand while maintaining her weapon with the other. Shook her head after 5 seconds of static. Still jammed. They've got electronic warfare capability up there. This isn't some ragtag force. Sloan's mind processed the tactical situation with clarity that felt disconnected from the chaos. 6 soldiers, 1 wounded critically. Enemy force of unknown size holding superior positions with suppressing fire and maneuver elements. Communications down. Support unavailable. Extraction impossible. The mathematics of survival running negative. The enemy had planned this carefully. Chosen this ground deliberately. Waited for exactly the right moment. This wasn't opportunity meeting chance. This was preparation meeting execution. Ammunition check, Garrett's voice cut through. Command reasserting itself over despair. The answers came back grim, each number a countdown to the inevitable. Larkin had 2 magazines left. Hollis had 3. Garrett had 4. Brennan had lost his rifle in the fall, only had his sidearm. Sloan had 15 rounds in her Beretta and 2 spare magazines she'd drawn at the armory, but never expected to fire in anger. We're not going to shoot our way out of this. Brennan's voice was tight with pain, but his tactical assessment was sound. The kind of clear thinking that came from years of experience from knowing when optimism became delusion. More enemy fire came down, forcing heads down, rounds cracking and whining off rocks with sounds that would haunt dreams if anyone lived long enough to dream. They're trying to make us surrender. Hollis had reached the same conclusion Sloan had reached minutes earlier. They could have killed us already if they wanted. They're shooting to pin, not kill. Garrett's jaw tightened, muscle working under frost-covered skin. We are not surrendering. Then what? Larkin snapped off 2 more bursts at shadows moving through trees, spending ammunition they couldn't afford to spend. Sir, I need orders that make sense. The silence that followed was the sound of mathematics catching up to hope, of reality overwhelming optimism, of 6 people understanding that the next decision might be the last one any of them made. Sloan looked at Brennan's leg. The tourniquet would hold for hours if needed, but that leg needed a surgeon. Real surgery with real doctors in a real hospital. Every minute of combat was a minute closer to permanent damage. Every second they stayed pinned was a second stolen from his future. Her eyes scanned the valley walls through falling snow. The enemy positions were good, better than good. They'd chosen firing positions that maximized cover while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. Professional work, competent work. But they'd made one mistake, small but significant. They were all using the same basic sight lines, converging their fire from predictable angles because those were the angles that provided the best natural cover. Textbook tactics, doctrine-approved positions, the kind taught in every military academy, which meant their positions could be calculated, predicted, mapped in her mind if she had time to think, to process, to remember skills she'd sworn she'd never use again. Sloan's eyes traced bullet impacts back to origin points, marked angles, measured distances. Her mind did the math without permission, calculating trajectories backward like solving equations, reading a language everyone else had forgotten. 3 firing positions on the left slope, 4 on the right, 2 more directly ahead at higher elevation. 9 confirmed shooters, possibly more hidden in the snow and distance. And they were all focused on keeping the unit pinned in this specific location, maintaining fire discipline, not wasting ammunition, waiting for something. They're waiting for something. Sloan spoke without thinking, the words escaping before she could stop them. Garrett looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since the ambush began. What? They have us pinned, but they're not pressing the advantage. They're maintaining fire discipline, not wasting ammunition on targets they can't clearly see. They're keeping us here, fixing us in place. For what? Aldridge's voice came from her right. The old colonel had positioned himself behind adequate cover, his rifle ready, his eyes calm despite the chaos. His face showed understanding that transcended the moment. This isn't the whole enemy force. This is just the fixing element. They're waiting for a larger unit to arrive and finish this. The expressions on the veterans' faces told Sloan they'd reached the same conclusion. That horrible moment when tactical reality overwhelmed hope. When professional assessment confirmed the worst-case scenario. How long, Garrett asked, not questioning Aldridge's analysis, trusting experience over optimism. Unknown. Sloan's mind worked through timelines, calculating based on what she'd observed. But if they've committed this much planning, if they've got electronic warfare and coordinated fire teams, the main force isn't far. Maybe 30 minutes, maybe less. Garrett looked at his map, looked at the terrain, looked at his wounded staff sergeant and his depleted ammunition counts. His face showed the weight of command, the burden of deciding how 6 people might survive when mathematics said they shouldn't. Suggestions. His question was aimed at everyone. But his eyes came to rest on Sloan, the rookie medic who wasn't supposed to be thinking tactically, who wasn't supposed to understand fire and maneuver, who wasn't supposed to see the battlefield the way she clearly saw it. Sloan felt the weight of that look, felt the moment hovering on an edge. She could say nothing. Stay in her lane. Be the medic who patches wounds and follows orders. Live with whatever happened next. Or she could break the wall she'd built around her past. Let them see who she'd been before she tried to become someone else. Let me see your rifle. The words came out calm, steadier than she felt. Garrett stared at her. Around them, enemy fire continued its rhythmic suppression. Rounds impacting with mechanical regularity. What I can take out their command element. Break their firing discipline. Create a window for withdrawal. You're a medic. I'm also a shooter. The words hung in the air between them. Confession and declaration. The thing she'd been hiding for 3 months exposed in 4 syllables. Garrett's eyes searched her face, looking for madness, for desperation, for whatever might explain why his rookie medic was claiming she could do what his trained rifleman couldn't. Cade, this isn't time for Staff Sergeant Brennan needs surgery in the next 4 hours, or he loses that leg. Sloan's eyes were steady, holding Garrett's gaze. We don't have 4 hours. We have maybe 30 minutes before their main force arrives. I can give us a chance. Larkin spoke up from his position, voice carrying over the gunfire. Sir, we're dead anyway if we sit here. Let her try. Aldridge shifted. Sloan felt his eyes on her, assessing, understanding something the others didn't yet grasp. Do it. Whatever you've been hiding, whatever you ran from, now's the time to stop running. Garrett looked at Sloan for 10 seconds that felt like an hour. A lifetime compressed into the space between heartbeats. Whatever he saw in her face, whatever desperation or capability or truth, it made him reach a decision. He unclipped his M4, handed it across. Sloan took the rifle. The weight settled into her hands like coming home, like returning to a place she'd tried to forget. She checked the chamber. Movements too smooth, too practiced, too professional for someone whose file said basic medic. 1 round chambered. She dropped the magazine. Counted visually, 28 rounds plus 1 in chamber, 29 shots, not enough to suppress 9 positions, but enough to be surgical, enough to change the equation. What do you need, Garrett asked, his voice different now, talking to her like an operator instead of cargo. Cover. 60 seconds after I start firing, they're going to shift focus to me. When they do, that's your window to move Brennan back to the first blue marker. I'll catch up. Sloan was already moving, low crawl, positioning herself 15 meters from the others. She found a slight rise that gave her angle on the valley slopes. Settled into prone position, pulled the rifle into her shoulder. The stock felt like coming home, like muscle memory she'd tried to kill, waking up, like the person she'd been forcing her way back into existence. Her breathing slowed. Automatic. 4 count in, hold for 2, 6 count out. Her heart rate dropped from 93 to 71. Her body responding to training she'd done 10,000 times. Training that had been burned into her neurons until thought became unnecessary. Stop shaking, her instructor's voice echoed from years ago, back when she'd been 19 and convinced she could change the world with precision and mathematics. A weapon is just a tool. Your body is just a platform. Your mind is what makes the difference. Sloan identified her first target, left slope, higher elevation. The shooter who'd hit at Brennan, she was certain, different weapon signature, different position, better skill than the others. He was firing from behind a boulder cluster, exposing only his upper torso and weapon during his firing sequences. She watched him, counting. He fired 3 rounds, ducked for 4 seconds, rose, Fired 3 more. Pattern, rhythm, predictability. The kind of discipline that came from training, from doctrine. From doing it the same way every time because that was what the manual said. Sloane waited, controlled her breathing. 4 count in, hold, 6 count out, pulse slowed to 63. The world narrowed, not to tunnel vision, to perfect clarity. She could see individual snowflakes, could track their movement, could read the wind in their drift. The target rose. Fired 3. Sloane put her crosshairs 2 feet to the right of where he was now, leading the movement. Accounting for the pattern she'd identified. 850 meters, wind right to left, approximately 7 miles per hour based on snowdrift, elevation angle 31 degrees. She did calculations that had become automatic, adjusted for wind drift, for bullet drop, for the angle of engagement. The target ducked. 4 seconds. Her finger found the trigger, took up first stage pressure. Waiting, waiting. The target rose exactly where she predicted, exactly when she'd calculated. Sloane exhaled slowly, pressed. The rifle cracked. Recoil punched her shoulder, familiar and unwelcome. Through the scope, she watched the impact point. 6 inches left of target. The round snapped past the shooter's head close enough that he flinched. Close enough that he knew someone had just tried to kill him, but not close enough. Miss, shit. Larkin's voice carried disappointment in something like vindication. The rookie medic had talked a big game and delivered nothing. But Sloane's mind was already recalculating. The miss told her everything. Wind had shifted, not 7 miles per hour. 9, maybe 10. Gusting. The valley was creating turbulence she hadn't accounted for. The enemy commander she'd targeted moved, shifted position, exposed more of himself, mocking the attempt. Confident now, certain that whoever had taken that shot wasn't worth worrying about. Sloane adjusted, led the target more, accounted for the increased wind drift. 875 meters now. Wind 10 miles per hour. Gusting. Target in motion. Her breathing slowed further. Pulse hit 57. The world crystallized into perfect clarity. Beyond thought, beyond calculation, pure pattern recognition. The target paused. 1 second of stillness. 1 second of vulnerability. Sloane pressed the trigger. The rifle spoke. Through the scope, she saw the impact. Center mass. The target jerked backward like a puppet with cut strings. His weapon clattered against stone. He disappeared behind the boulder and didn't rise again. For 2 full seconds, the entire valley held its breath. Then the world detonated into chaos. Every enemy position erupted simultaneously. Muzzle flashes blooming like deadly flowers across both valley walls. They'd identified the threat. Now they were responding with overwhelming violence, concentrating fire on her sector with professional precision. What the hell, Garrett's exclamation was swallowed by the sudden hurricane of incoming rounds. But Sloane was already moving. The first rule of sniping that her instructors had drilled into her until it became reflex. Shoot and move. Never stay static. Never give them a second chance at the same target. She rolled left, using terrain, letting gravity and momentum carry her behind different cover 10 meters from her original position. The space she'd occupied 3 seconds earlier exploded with impacts, rounds chewing through snow and vegetation. Enemy shooters dumping ammunition into empty air. They were good, but they were reacting to where she'd been, not where she was. That gave her the edge. Bought her the seconds she needed. Second target, right slope, middle elevation. Her scope found him through the falling snow. He was using a tree for partial cover. But he'd made the amateur mistake of choosing concealment over protection. The pine trunk was thick enough to hide behind, not thick enough to stop bullets. Sloane's crosshairs settled on the space just left of the tree trunk, where his center mass had to be based on the visible parts of his body. 780 meters, wind still gusting, target stationary. She pressed the trigger. Through the scope, she saw bark explode from the tree's far side. Saw the shooter's weapon drop. Saw him collapse into snow. 2 down, third target, left slope, lower position. This one had shifted to get angle on her new location, exposing himself in the process. Aggression overriding training. 920 meters. Wind shifting again. Target moving between cover points. Sloane led him, fired. Impact. The shooter dropped like gravity had suddenly tripled. His weapon tumbling down the slope end over end until it disappeared into a snowdrift. 3 down, fourth target. Left slope, higher elevation. Deep cover. This one was smart, firing from behind a rock cluster that provided excellent protection, exposing only his muzzle during shooting sequences. But muzzle flash in daylight snow was a beacon. She couldn't see him to shoot him, but she could predict where he had to be, based on the geometry of his muzzle flash. She waited for his next burst, saw the orange bloom against white snow, calculated backward from muzzle position to where his body had to be positioned, put her crosshairs 3 feet behind the visible flash, fired 3 rounds in rapid succession, bracketing the estimated position. The muzzle flash stopped, didn't shift position, didn't resume firing, just stopped. 4 down. Targets 5 through 9 came in rapid sequence. Her mind entered a state beyond thought, beyond calculation, pure pattern recognition and execution. 840 meters, 1,050 meters, 960 meters, 885 meters, 1,120 meters. Each shot deliberate, each adjustment precise. Not all hits were confirmed kills. Some were suppression, making shooters keep their heads down, breaking their rhythm. But the effect was the same. The enemy attack faltered. Coordination degraded. Fire discipline collapsed. What had been a professional ambush became scattered, shooting by individuals trying to survive. 9 shots fired after the initial miss, 7 confirmed impacts, 2 suppression effects. The equation had changed. Move Brennan now. Sloane's shout cut through the gunfire. Behind her sounds of tactical withdrawal, Garrett's voice giving commands, Larkin's suppressive fire creating windows, Hollis's harsh breathing as she helped drag Brennan toward the blue marker. But the enemy wasn't done. Through the snow, Sloane saw new movement. Not retreat, not repositioning, assault. 7 or 8 figures moving fast down slope, trying to close the distance while the unit was pulling back, trying to overrun the position before they could escape, capitalizing on what they thought was a broken defense. Sloane's rifle clicked empty. Magazine exhausted, she dropped it. Drew her Beretta M9. 15 rounds in the magazine. 1 in chamber. 2 spare magazines on her belt. 48 total. The enemy was at 80 meters. 70, closing fast, moving with purpose. With confidence, thinking they'd won. Too far for pistol. Wait. 60 meters. 50. They were committing to the charge. Breaking cover, bunching up, making the same mistakes that training was supposed to eliminate. Thinking the unit was broken. Thinking they'd already won. 45 meters. 40. Sloane stepped into the open, exposed herself completely, drew a breath, let half out. The first enemy soldier appeared clearly through the snowfall. Young face, determined eyes. Center mass framed in her sights. 38 meters, at the edge of effective pistol range, but not beyond skill. She fired twice. Double tap. The textbook drill. Both rounds connected. The soldier dropped mid-stride. Second target, 35 meters, moving right, angular vector. She led him by 3 feet, accounting for his speed and direction. Fired twice, both rounds hit. He went down hard, weapon skittering across snow. Third target saw her, started to turn his weapon. 32 meters. Sloane fired 3 times. Center mass, throat, head. The third round was insurance, making sure he collapsed without firing a shot. Fourth and fifth targets together, 28 meters now, close enough to see their faces clearly. See the surprise, see the fear. She fired at the left target. 2 rounds, shifted smoothly, fired at the right. 2 rounds, both dropped within a second of each other. 15 rounds expended, 5 targets down in maybe 8 seconds. The mathematics of precision against desperation. The remaining enemy soldiers broke, turned, ran. The assault had become a massacre. What they'd thought was an easy victory had turned into a killing field. They scrambled back up slope, discipline gone, survival instinct taking over. Sloane's hands started shaking then. The Beretta suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Everything she'd been holding back collapsed at once. All the control, all the certainty, all the mechanical precision. Her body understanding what her mind had been denying. She'd just killed 14 people in less than 10 minutes. But they were alive. The unit was alive. Brennan would keep his leg. That was what mattered. That was what had to matter. Move. She grabbed Garrett's arm, helped with Brennan. They scrambled toward the blue marker while enemy fire resumed from the ridge. Confused, scattered, no longer coordinated, the attack had broken. They pushed through the ravine, steep-sided, snow waist-deep, progress slow. But the high walls provided cover from the elevated positions. For the first time since the ambush started, they had something approaching shelter. Behind them, enemy fire echoed off rock walls, but the pursuit was cautious now, uncertain. They'd lost their best shooters, their command element. What had been coordinated attack had become reactive defense. 20 minutes later, Hollis spotted pursuit. Contact rear. 4, maybe 5 shooters. 300 meters back. Sloan dropped to a rear guard. 4 targets. 5 rounds left in Garrett's rifle that she'd picked back up. She aimed at the lead pursuer. Fired. The shot went left. Wind drift in the narrow valley. She adjusted. Fired again. This one connected. The lead pursuer grabbed his shoulder. Fell into snow. The others scattered to cover. Professional reaction. Sloan fired 3 more rounds, keeping heads down. Then ran to catch the unit. They're still coming. She told Garrett between breaths. I clipped one but didn't stop them. Radio suddenly crackled. The jamming had lifted. Second platoon, this is command. Say status. Garrett's relief was almost physical. His voice shook slightly when he answered. Command second platoon. Combat effective with 1 urgent casualty. Request immediate extraction from grid Delta 7-4. Roger that. Birds are inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Mark your position with IR strobe. The helicopters came through snowfall like salvation. 2 Blackhawks with full gun packages. Door gunners scanning for threats. They landed in a clearing 50 meters from the unit's position. Downdraft whipping snow into a blinding storm. Medics rushed out with a stretcher. Sloan briefed them rapidly. Clinical, professional, arterial tourniquet applied 1,400 hours. Time applied 2 hours, 22 minutes. IV fluids running, 1 liter saline, vitals declining but stable. Systolic 90/60, heart rate 112, respiratory rate 24. They nodded, impressed by the field work, by the clarity of her report, by the fact that Brennan was alive when the math said he shouldn't be. They got him aboard, gentle but efficient, every movement calculated to minimize trauma. The rest of the unit loaded up. As the helicopter lifted, Sloan looked down at the battlefield through the open door. Snow was already covering the evidence, filling in boot prints and blood pools, erasing the story of what had happened. In an hour, it would look like nothing had occurred, like the valley had never witnessed violence. But something had happened. Something had changed. She could feel it in the way the others looked at her, in the space they gave her, in the questions forming behind their eyes. The flight back took 20 minutes. Nobody spoke over the engine noise. But Garrett kept looking at her, Larkin staring like she was a stranger. Hollis's expression mixing gratitude with something approaching awe. And Aldridge sitting across with a slight smile that suggested he'd known something all along. At base, Captain Nora Sullivan met them at the pad, her face tight, professional. Debrief. Conference room. Now. Sloan walked across the tarmac knowing everything was about to come out, knowing the wall she'd built around her past was about to crumble completely, knowing that the person she'd tried to stop being had just forced her way back into existence, and not knowing whether that was salvation or damnation. The conference room was warm, painfully bright after hours in gray snowfield. Captain Nora Sullivan sat at the head of the table, her uniform crisp, her posture perfect. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, sterile and unforgiving. Sloan's wet boots left puddles on the linoleum floor. She could still smell cordite on her hands, still feel the rifle's recoil in her shoulder. Garrett gave the tactical rundown, professional, thorough, no embellishment. He laid out the ambush, the casualties, the withdrawal, the firefight. When he got to the part about Sloan's shooting, Sullivan's expression shifted, something between calculation and disbelief. Corporal Cade, Sullivan's voice was measured, controlled. 9 confirmed enemy kills with a rifle you'd never trained on, in blizzard conditions, at extended range. Then covered the unit's withdrawal while wounded yourself. Yes, ma'am. Sloan's voice was steady, giving nothing away. Her shoulder throbbed where the round had grazed her, a flesh wound the flight medic had bandaged during the helicopter ride. Nothing serious? Nothing that would slow her down. Your file says basic marksmanship qualification. Expert with pistol, sharpshooter with rifle. Standard medic certifications? Sullivan leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Nothing else. So I'll ask you directly, Corporal. Who are you? The question hung in the air, direct and unavoidable. Sloan looked at the faces around the table. Garrett, Hollis, Larkin. They'd earned an answer. They'd trusted her when trust was all that stood between them and death. Before I was a medic, I was a scout sniper. The words came easier than Sloan expected. Like saying them out loud made them more real, more true. Marine Corps 3rd Division. 2 deployments. 47 missions. 51 confirmed kills over 18 months of combat operations. Sullivan's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened on the pen she was holding. Why isn't this in your file? Because I requested it be sealed. Because I reclassified to medical. Because I wanted a clean start. Sloan paused, the memory still sharp enough to cut. Because my spotter died because of a decision I made, and I couldn't carry a rifle after that. The silence that followed was heavy. Hollis shifted in her seat. Larkin stared at the table. Even Garrett, who'd seen enough combat to understand the weight of command decisions, looked uncomfortable. Tell us. Sullivan's voice was softer now, not demanding but inviting. If this goes in my report, I need the full story. Sloan took a breath. She'd carried this alone for 18 months. Maybe it was time to set it down. His name was Evan Rhodes, 24 years old. From Oregon, best spotter I ever worked with. We deployed together to Afghanistan in early 2024. Helmand province mostly. Overwatch missions, convoy protection, counterinsurgency operations. The memory came back with perfect clarity. Evan's face always calm under pressure. His voice in her ears steady and certain. Winds 3 knots left to right. Targets moving. Lead him 2 feet. The partnership that had kept them both alive through missions that should have killed them. We'd been out 47 times together. Never missed a shot that mattered. Never lost a Marine and we were covering. We were good, better than good. We thought we were invincible. Sloan's hands were steady on the table, but something in her chest was tight. Mission 48 was convoy overwatch, standard stuff. We'd done it 100 times. But intel said there was an enemy sniper operating in the area. Someone good. Someone who'd killed 3 of ours in the previous month. What happened? Garrett's voice was quiet. I was on the rifle. Evan was spotting. We had good position, good sight lines. Convoy was moving through a choke point. I saw the enemy sniper. 1,100 meters elevated position. Perfect shot if I could just confirm wind conditions. Sloan could still see it. The scope picture. The target. The moment when everything hung in balance. I told Evan to move up 3 feet, get a better angle for the wind red. It would expose him for maybe 5 seconds, but we needed that information. The shot was critical. If I missed, the convoy was vulnerable. And there was another sniper. A counter-sniper team we didn't know about. They'd been waiting, watching. They knew how spotter and shooter teams worked. They knew we'd need that wind confirmation. Sloan's voice remained steady, but the words came harder now. Evan moved. He got the wind red. 3.5 knots quartering right. Perfect data. I was lining up the shot when the round hit him. High velocity, probably 7.62 by 51. Center mass, he was dead before I could reach him. No one spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside voices called across the base, normal sounds of normal operations, a world that kept turning despite individual tragedy. I took the shot anyway, killed the primary target. Then I found the counter sniper. Killed him too. 1,150 meters uphill with the tears in my eyes and Evan's blood on my hands. Then I called in the medevac for a body I knew was already gone. Sullivan's face showed something like sympathy, but she didn't interrupt. Sloan continued. The after-action report cleared me. Command said I made the right tactical decision. Said Evan knew the risks. Said it was just bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. They wanted me to keep operating. Said I was too valuable to lose. But you left anyway. Yes, ma'am. I couldn't look at a rifle without seeing him. Couldn't line up a shot without hearing his voice. Couldn't do the job anymore. So I reclassified. Became a medic. Thought maybe I could balance the scales. Save as many as I'd killed. Make Evan's death mean something. And today I broke the promise I made. To Evan's memory, to myself, to my mother. Sloan met Sullivan's eyes, but Staff Sergeant Brennan is alive because I did. The unit made it out because I did. Sometimes you have to break promises to keep people breathing. Before Sullivan could respond, Aldridge spoke from the back of the room. His voice was calm, measured, carrying the weight of decades. There's more to the story, Captain. If I may, Sullivan nodded. Aldridge stood, moved to stand beside Sloan. 3 months ago, I received a call from James Cade, Delta Force operator retired. He told me his daughter had just transferred to 2nd Platoon. He asked me to keep an eye on her if I could, said she was running from herself. Sloan turned, staring at Aldridge. The old colonel's face showed something like paternal concern. Your father showed me your records, Corporal. Your real records, not the sanitized version in your current file. He was proud of you, incredibly proud, but he was also worried. He said you'd buried half of who you were, and it was killing you slowly. My father died 2 years ago. He contacted me 6 months before he passed. Made me promise that when the moment came when you needed to remember who you really were, I'd be there to help. Aldridge's voice softened. He knew eventually you'd face a choice. Medical or tactical, healing or fighting. He wanted you to understand you could be both. That you had to be both. That's who you really are. The weight of the revelation settled over Sloane like snow. Her father had orchestrated this, had reached out from beyond death to guide her back to herself. The deployment, Aldridge's presence, all of it planned. He left you something. Aldridge pulled an envelope from his jacket, handed it to Sloane. The handwriting on the outside was her father's, strong and clear. To be opened when she remembers. Sloane's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside, a single page. Her father's words. Sloane, if you're reading this through Marcus, it means the moment came. It means you had to choose between the person you were trying to be and the person you actually are. I'm proud, not because you shot to kill, not because you saved lives, but because you chose when each was necessary. Your mother made you promise never to touch a rifle again. I never agreed with that promise, but I understood it. She was afraid of losing you the way she almost lost me a dozen times. But fear isn't a good reason to deny who you are. Evan Rhodes died doing his job. He knew the risks. He made his choice. You didn't kill him. War killed him. Circumstance killed him. Bad timing and worse luck killed him. But you honored him by trying to become something else. Now honor him by being whole. Be both, Sloane. The world needs people who can heal and protect. People who know which is which. People who can carry a rifle and a medical kit and understand when each is required. I won't be there to see it, but Marcus will. Trust him. Trust yourself. And know that I was proud of you before you ever picked up either one. Dad? Sloane read it twice, then folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope. When she looked up, her eyes were dry, but something in her face had changed. Some burden lifted or accepted, she couldn't tell which. Sullivan cleared her throat. This is highly irregular, but given the circumstances, given the results, I'm prepared to make a recommendation. You saved your unit, Corporal. You demonstrated capabilities we didn't know existed. The question is what we do with that information. 2 weeks later, Sloane stood in a briefing room with 2nd Platoon and a dozen other personnel she didn't recognize. The mission brief was complex. Hostage rescue, mountain compound, high-value target, multiple hostile forces. The kind of operation that required precision and adaptability in equal measure. Garrett outlined the approach. Sloane would provide sniper overwatch during the initial breach. 2 sentries needed elimination before the assault team could move. Standard stuff. Then she'd transition to the assault element for medical support. Questions. Garrett looked around the room. No one spoke. They'd all heard what happened in Glacier Valley. The story had spread. The details had grown in the telling, but the core remained true. The medic could shoot. The operation launched at 0400. Sloane took position on a ridge overlooking the compound, 680 meters from the primary structure. The night vision scope painted the world in shades of green. 2 sentries walked patrol patterns, predictable and regular. She waited for the signal. When it came, she fired twice in rapid succession. Both sentries dropped. The assault team moved. Then everything went wrong. The breach charge detonated early. Hollis was closest to the door when it blew. The overpressure wave threw her backward, slammed her into a wall. Sloane was moving before the debris settled, abandoning the rifle, pulling her medical kit. She reached Hollis in 20 seconds. The young woman was gasping, her chest moving wrong. Sloane's hands moved automatically, assessment, becoming action. Tension pneumothorax, sucking chest wound. The explosion had created pressure in the chest cavity that was collapsing the lung. Needle decompression kit. Sloane's voice was calm, clinical. She pulled a 14-gauge needle from her kit, felt for landmarks. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular, line bio. The anatomy was clear in her mind. She pushed the needle through skin, through muscle, between ribs. The hiss of escaping air was immediate. Hollis gasped, her chest movement normalizing. Color returned to her face. Sloane taped the catheter in place, checked vitals. Heart rate elevated but steady. Breathing normalized. Patient stable. Contact. Larkin's shout came from inside the compound. Enemy reinforcements. Multiple shooters. The assault team was pinned. Sloane grabbed her rifle, sprinted to a firing position, found targets through the scope. 4 enemy combatants moving to flank the assault team. She fired 4 times. 4 impacts. The flanking maneuver collapsed. Get Hollis to the extract point, she shouted to the medic who'd arrived behind her. I'm going forward. The next 10 minutes became a blur of rapid transitions. Shooting to suppress enemy positions. Sprinting forward to treat a wounded teammate. Back to shooting. Back to medical. The line between healer and warrior disappeared entirely. She was both. Had always been both. Would always be both. When the helicopters arrived for extraction, 12 minutes after the breach, the mission was complete. Hostages recovered. Enemy neutralized. 2 friendly wounded, both stable, both expected to make full recovery. On the flight back, Garrett sat beside her. You know what you proved today? What, sir, that integration beats specialization. That the future isn't people who do one thing perfectly. It's people who can do multiple things well and know which one the moment requires. 3 days later, Sloan stood at attention in front of the entire company. Captain Sullivan read the citation for the Silver Star. Extraordinary heroism in combat operations, tactical excellence resulting in mission success, medical intervention, saving multiple lives under fire, the integration of combat and medical skills representing a new model for battlefield effectiveness. Sullivan pinned the medal to Sloan's uniform. Well done, Corporal. You've earned this and more. The applause was genuine. Brennan was there, a leg in a cast, crutches beside him. His face showed gratitude that went beyond words. Larkin stood in the front row, the man who doubted her most now, her strongest advocate. Hollis, recovered from her injuries, smiled with something like pride. After the ceremony, Sullivan pulled Sloan aside. Division wants you back as a pure sniper. They're saying you're wasted as a medic. Sloan had known this was coming, had felt it approaching. With respect, ma'am, I'd like to stay where I am. Sullivan raised an eyebrow. You want to remain a medic after proving you're one of the best shooters we have? I don't want to be just a shooter anymore. But I understand now that I can't be just a medic either. Sloan chose her words carefully. I want to be both, if that's possible. It wasn't. Until now, Sullivan's voice was firm. I'm redesignating your MOS. You'll be our first official combat medic/designated marksman. Dual role, full authorization for both skill sets. You'll get the equipment and training support you need. That night, Sloan sat alone in her quarters and wrote a letter she should have written 18 months ago. She addressed it to Michael and Sarah Rhodes Evans' parents, people she'd been too ashamed to face, too guilty to contact. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes, I'm writing to tell you about your son, about who he was and what he meant and how he died. I've waited too long. I'm sorry for that. Evan was the best spotter I ever worked with. He was calm under pressure. He was precise. He was brave. He saved my life a dozen times through his skill and his dedication. On our last mission, I made a tactical decision that exposed him to enemy fire. He died following my orders. I've carried that guilt for 18 months. I've tried to make it right by giving up the rifle, by becoming a medic, by saving lives instead of taking them. But I understand now that wasn't what Evan would have wanted. He believed in the mission. He believed in protecting Marines. He believed that sometimes you have to fight to protect what matters. Today I picked up a rifle again. I used it to save my team. Then I used my medical training to save them again. I was both. I think Evan would approve. I think he'd tell me it was about time. I'm sending you his spotter scope, the one he carried on every mission. I've kept it clean, kept it maintained, but it belongs with you. Thank you for raising a son who knew what service meant, who knew that some things are worth the risk. I'll carry his memory forward, not by refusing to shoot, but by choosing when it matters. With deepest respect and sorrow, Sloan Cade. She sealed it, addressed it, placed it on her desk to mail in the morning. One more step toward integration. One more piece of the past made peace with. 6 months passed like water through fingers. Fort Benning, Georgia. August heat replaced Colorado snow. The base shimmered under southern sun air thick enough to taste. Sloan walked across the training area, her stride confident, purposeful. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. The weight she'd lost during those months of running from herself had returned. 14 pounds of muscle and health. The scar on her shoulder where the round had grazed her in Glacier Valley had healed to a thin white line. Badge of honor. Reminder of the day she'd stopped being divided. She reached the classroom building, pushed through doors into air-conditioned space. 18 students waited. Mixed gender, mixed ranks ranging from corpsmen to Army medics to Air Force pararescue. The first class of integrated combat response training. The pilot program that had grown from one woman's choice in a snowbound valley. Good morning. Sloan's voice carried authority now earned through action rather than rank. Welcome to week 1. For the next 16 weeks, you're going to learn to be both, medic and marksman, healer and warrior. You'll learn when to reach for a rifle and when to reach for a tourniquet. More importantly, you'll learn how to make that decision in the chaos of combat. A young corpsman in the front row, couldn't be more than 20, raised his hand. Ma'am, they say you can hit targets at over 1,000 meters. They say you've saved more lives than some entire medical companies. How do we learn to do both? You start by understanding they're not separate. Sloan moved to the whiteboard, picked up a marker. Shooting and healing both require precision. Both require staying calm under pressure. Both require reading situations and making split-second decisions. The skills overlap more than you'd think, she wrote on the board. Steady hands, controlled breathing, situational awareness, pattern recognition, rapid decision-making. These apply to both roles. A good shooter reads wind and terrain. A good medic reads vital signs and injury patterns. It's the same fundamental skill. Observation leading to action. You're not learning two separate jobs. You're learning two applications of the same mindset. Another student spoke up, older, maybe 30, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen combat. What about the mental side? How do you switch between saving lives and taking them? You don't switch, you integrate. Sloane's voice was firm. You understand that both serve the same purpose. Protection. Sometimes you protect by treating wounds. Sometimes you protect by eliminating threats. The goal is always the same. Get your people home alive. Over the next 6 months, the program proved itself. 63 medics graduated from the initial training pipeline. Deployment data started coming back. Reduced casualties in units with integrated personnel. Faster response times. Better tactical awareness. The numbers told the story that Sloane's actions had written. The Pentagon noticed. 3 branches began developing formal doctrine for dual-role specialists. What had been an experiment became policy. What had been one woman's desperate choice in a kill zone became institutional evolution. General Aldridge, promoted and assigned to training command, visited the program on a crisp October morning. He watched Sloane run a training scenario. Medical emergency requiring rapid treatment, followed immediately by hostile contact requiring precision fire. The students moved through it with increasing competence, muscle memory, building integration becoming natural. Afterward, he pulled her aside. Your father would be proud. Hell, I'm proud. You've started something bigger than yourself. Just doing the job, sir. Aldridge smiled. That's what your father always said, too. But you're not just doing a job, you're changing how we think about capability, about specialization, about what's possible when you refuse to be limited by categories. That evening, Sloane made a phone call she'd been putting off. Her mother answered on the second ring. Mom, Sloane. Her mother's voice carried warmth and worry in equal measure. How are you, sweetheart? I'm good, really good. Sloane looked around her office. Dual role insignia on the wall, medical certifications beside marksmanship awards. Integration made visible. I need to tell you something. I broke my promise. The one about never touching a rifle again. Silence on the other end. Then I know. Marcus told me months ago. I've been waiting for you to call. You're not angry. I was. At first, her mother's voice was soft. I was angry at your father for setting it up. Angry at Marcus for going along with it. Angry at you for giving in. But then I talked to Staff Sergeant Brennan's wife. She told me what you did, how you saved her husband's life. And I realized something. What your father was right. He usually was a stubborn bastard. You can't be half of who you are. It was killing you slowly. I saw it every time you called, heard it in your voice. You were drowning in guilt, and I was helping you drown by making you promise to stay broken. Mom, let me finish. I'm proud of you. For breaking the promise. For being whole again. For honoring Evan by being both the person who could have saved him and the person who can save others. Your father knew you'd need both. He was right. Sloane felt tears threatening for the first time in months. She controlled her breathing, maintained composure. Thank you. I needed to hear that. One more thing. When are you coming home? I want to see this integrated warrior healer my daughters become. Soon, I promise. They talked for another 20 minutes. Normal things, family things, the kind of conversation that came from acceptance rather than avoidance. When Sloane hung up, something in her chest had loosened, the last piece of the past settling into place. 2 weeks later, Sloane drove to Montana. The cemetery was small, peaceful, overlooked the valley where she'd grown up. Her father's grave was well maintained, fresh flowers from her mother's weekly visits. Sloane knelt in grass still damp with morning dew, placed 2 items at the base of the headstone, a medical caduceus pin, a designated marksman badge, symbols of integration. I'm both now, Dad, like you always said I could be. Not running anymore, not hiding from half of myself. Evan would approve. I think he'd tell me it was about damn time. She stayed for an hour, talked to Stone and memory, told her father about the program, about the students, about the changes spreading through the military, about how one choice in a snowbound valley had become institutional evolution. When she left, the weight she'd carried for 2 years felt lighter. Not gone, never gone, but carried differently, integrated into who she was rather than something fighting against it. The final piece came on a December morning. Sloane stood in her office at Fort Benning. Mission briefs covered her desk, medical protocols on one side, tactical assessments on the other. A custom M40A6 rifle leaned in the corner beside a fully stocked medical kit. A knock at the door. A young woman entered, newly assigned to the base. 23 years old Army medic with uncertain eyes that Sloan recognized because she'd worn the same expression 6 months earlier. Ma'am, permission to ask about the dual qualification program. Granted, sit down. The young medic sat, nervous hands clasping and unclasping. I heard what you did in Colorado, how you saved your unit. I have skills I haven't told anyone about. Before I was a medic, I competed in long-range shooting, won state championships. But when I enlisted, I thought medical was safer. Thought I should choose one or the other. And now I'm wondering if I made a mistake. If maybe I could be both. Sloan leaned forward. Tell me, if you could do both, really integrate them, would you? Yes, ma'am. I think so. I want to help people. But I'm good with a rifle. It feels wrong to waste that. It's not about waste. It's about understanding that healing and protection aren't opposites. Sloan pulled out an application form. They're complements, two sides of the same mission. If you're serious, we start training in January. 16 weeks. It's not easy. You'll learn to transition between roles in seconds. You'll learn when each is necessary. You'll learn to be whole instead of divided. The young medic's eyes lit up. I'm serious, ma'am. Both hands, both hands. Sloan handed over the form. Watch the young woman fill it out with hands that shook slightly, with excitement or nervousness or hope. The cycle continuing, the integration spreading, one person at a time, the future taking shape. That evening, Sloan stood on the range at sunset. 6 students practiced transitions, medical drill to shooting drill, tourniquet application to target engagement, the movements becoming smoother with each repetition, the mental shift becoming natural. She watched them work, these people learning to be both, and thought about the path that had led here. From her father's ranch in Montana, to Marine sniper, to broken medic, to integrated warrior. From running from herself to finally standing still and accepting all of who she was. The sun dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The students packed up their equipment. Rifles and medical kits stored side by side. Tomorrow they'd do it again. And the day after. Building competence through repetition. Building integration through practice. Sloan picked up her own rifle, her father's rifle passed down when she was 16, and carried through 2 wars and 18 months of denial and 6 months of acceptance. The wood was worn smooth, the action perfect, a tool that had taught her precision and patience and the weight of decisions measured in fractions of inches at impossible distances. Beside it, her medical kit, tourniquets and hemostatic agents and chest seals and all the equipment needed to keep humans alive when their bodies wanted to quit. Tools that had taught her care and speed and the value of seconds measured in heartbeats and blood loss. She slung the rifle over one shoulder, picked up the medical kit with her other hand, balanced, integrated, whole. Behind her, a voice called out, "Ma'am, same time tomorrow, same time." Sloan turned, smiled. "Bring both hands ready." She walked across the range as darkness settled, lights coming on across the base, people moving through evening routines. A world that kept turning, a military that kept evolving, a future that kept arriving whether anyone was ready or not. Somewhere in that future there would be more valleys like Glacier, more moments when the choice between healing and fighting would determine who lived and who didn't, more people who would need someone who could do both. Sloan Cade, 23 years old, 5'4", 132 pounds, combat medic / designated marksman, walked through the gathering dark carrying the tools of her integrated trade, ready for whatever came next, ready to heal, ready to fight, ready to know which was which. The rifle her father had given her now taught others. The skills her guilt had buried now saved lives. The integration she'd fought against now defined her. Some legacies don't end with one person. They multiply.